Modern neuroscience may have just settled a century-old argument between Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. Now, both of these men were part of a movement, the psychoanalytic movement, that made a bizarre proposition about how our minds work. Of course, we all like to think that we make our decisions for ourselves. If we want to do something throughout the day, we assume that it's all just rational thoughts going through our heads. It's our free will that is dictating what we have for breakfast. But these gentlemen would propose that we have a hidden part of our minds, an unconscious minds, a reservoir of old memories and various things that massively influence our decision making. Now, the argument between Freud and Jung comes down to the nature of this unconscious. So let's start with Freud and his model. He believed that there were two significant powers in the hidden part of our imagination that were pulling at our conscious thinking mind. Down in the depth of your body was your instinct producing libido. That was your will to love, your will to procreate. And it was driving all of your decisions. Obviously, what is your goal here on this planet is to pass your DNA on. So that is the thing that sets you mad. So Freud's proposition was that this libido pumps us full of frenzied energy that demands that we claim the people we wish to perpetuate the species with, and we violently attack those who get in our way. But of course, some other force exists in our imagination that stops this from happening. Now, this force is what Freud called the superego. This is where we store all of our memories about laws and punishments and dangers, and reasons that we should be afraid of trying to pursue our ends that our instincts demand. I'm sorry to inform you, but unfortunately there's a broad array of laws around the expression of our libido and our ability to walk around naked in public and commit violent acts. And we come in contact with these laws through authority figures, priests, our parents, our teachers, police officers. These tyrants always appear in our lives and discipline us and punish us, and it installs inside of us a fear and a guilt. We feel restrictions. We feel voices in our heads that tell us not to do things, and this suppresses our libido. And our conscious ego is sitting there in the middle of this, with all these feelings of guilt, memory, and fear coming from these authority figures, and all these instincts and drives and passions coming from below, pulling our ego apart. And we sit here as this conscious mind saying, who should we listen to? Is there really a danger here? Can we just kind of like stretch these laws a little bit? And if we realize we can't, we have to then grab onto these libidinous forces and push them down inside of us and suppress them. Now, this theory obviously feels true on some level, but it has an issue about it where it feels quite mechanical and blunt. We look at ourselves then as these sort of machines driven by instincts and fears, but there's not much of a personality inside there or anything special or magical or divine. We're just almost like a machine going out there to pass on our DNA and the threats that get in the way of us of doing this. And Jung took issue with this. Now, this is where the contest begins to happen, because Jung asserts something that's a little bit more mystical. Now, Freud is going to say to Jung, bro, we want to get popular, we want to get famous, we live in the scientific early 20th century, people aren't going to want to hear about mysticism, so how about you keep that to yourself like a good boy and just fucking say what we tell you to say. But Jung refused to say what Freud told him to say, so they ended up having a breakup. But what was Jung asserting? Jung proposed that our imagination, our unconscious, the hidden forces inside of our minds, had an intelligence. More so, it had a character and a personality. Jung was proposing that our hidden minds, or unconscious, could give us information that we didn't consciously know. It was capable of creating things. Now, he demonstrated this in his own way in some of his works, like Archetypes of the Collective Unconscious. He has a woman who begins to paint, and she develops the capacity to paint, and she starts to bring all these symbols into her paintings that are, as Jung would call, archetypal, things that you would see in like alchemy and religion. And Jung points to these instances of, all right, first of all, this woman is developing the capacity to do an artistic project. And she's doing these artistic projects with no conscious study of symbolism or alchemy. And she's developing all these enormously profound symbols that come from all these traditions, like snakes and various circles and mandalas and stuff like this. And he points out that this is a sign of a creative intelligence hidden inside of her imagination that she sort of allows to speak through her. And this is what Jung saw as the unconscious, this ordering, artistic, creative character that spoke to us through symbols. Now, you can understand why Freud was like, Carl, what are you talking about? You're scaring the hoes with this talk. You're going to scare off all the publishers. People are going to think we're quacks. Shut up. Please be quiet. But Jung was not quiet, and so he got ostracized and pushed out of the psychoanalytic movement for essentially being a quack, for being crazy, for talking about this nonsense. Now, recently, Ian McGilchrist has come along and studied the neuroscience of our brain hemispheres and pretty much verified that Jung was correct. What Ian McGilchrist was studying is the structure of our brain, the theory of the hemispheres, and the fact that we have a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere, which I'm sure you've heard before. Now, the studies show that our left hemisphere essentially behaves as this ego, this conscious mind that these old guys 100 years ago were speaking about. The left hemisphere is the source of our language processing. So when I am speaking to you right now, this is my left hemisphere that is doing the majority of the communication. We interact with people in this left hemispheric way. This is the conscious mind, it seems. Now, this right hemisphere that we have is active at the same time and doing stuff in the background, but we aren't really consciously aware of it. We seem like we sit on the left side. And the right hemisphere can't speak. It doesn't really have language capacities, but it can talk with symbols, it can draw. And people who've had their brains cut in half have had researchers communicate with both sides of the brain at the same time. And the right brain will talk via pictures and symbols and it'll be able to communicate. And the left hemisphere, your conscious ego, will not be aware of this discussion. Now, this right hemisphere has its own personality, its own character, its own separate sort of force, its own separate being. A lot of really crazy things, man. It's artistic, it's got this capacity to speak in symbols. It looks like Carl's conception of the Jungian unconscious. It seems like Carl got it right.